Hey there, and welcome to my latest landscape and wilderness photography video blog here in Tasmania. Today I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm not going to take you out there into the outdoors in pursuit of a new image, but what I'm going to do with you today is share a different layer of my photography, and that is how I've reached some sort of commercial success with the images I take. Now, being a landscape photographer, without a doubt, is probably one of the hardest ways to make any sort of income. Believe it or not, I have had the most success throughout the last 10 to 15 years selling prints, and not just prints on their own, but frame prints. Now, in such a saturated market in photography, prints or photographic locations available in print is absolutely abundant at the moment. So what is it that it takes to separate your image from everyone else's? What I have found that sells prints, it is to do with an emotional connection to the landscape. And what does it take to get a viewer to have that connection to the landscape? And from what I have discovered, it is if someone has been to that particular place and they can identify with that landscape, then they get that connection, and the chances are they're going to be more interested in hanging a picture on the wall of that place. Now, moving on, apart from selling prints on their own, something else I've been able to evolve with over the last 10 years or so is to come up with my own style of framing. What I have been able to do is harness an amazing natural resource here in Tasmania. Now, before I go about making a timber frame for an image, I usually try to pick an image out before I make the frame. It usually makes that journey of timber selection a little bit easier to try and get a nice harmony between colours and texture between the timber and the picture. For this video diary, I'm going to use this picture I took 3 years ago of Ama Dablam in Nepal. For anyone that's ever been to base camp or done any other trekking in the region will know exactly what this mountain is, as it takes many days to make your way around this mountain, and it is a real centerpiece on that trek through the Everest region. Now, this image I've chosen has a very big wheaty coloured foreground, or a lot of strong yellows, and it's got a very strong blue sky, which I was lucky enough to get late that afternoon before a hectic snowstorm came in the next day. And I've decided to balance these colours out with a timber known as Huon pine, which only grows here in Tasmania, the only place in the whole world it grows. And what makes this wood super special is it takes about 2,000 to 3,000 years for one tree to mature. Now, before you go and get any big ideas to come to Tasmania and to start cutting down trees and making your own frames, it's highly illegal to come here and start chopping down living forest. And all the timbers that I do use are from sustainable salvage operations, and no living trees were harmed in the process of making this frame. So what I'm going to show you now is the process that I take for making one of these individual frames. Welcome to the workshop, and this is where it all starts for making one of these picture frames. The first thing I'm going to do is show you these boards here. These are just quarter sawn boards, and the reason I use quarter sawn is I really want a stable frame. And these planks here, these lovely two planks, will form the inner and outer layers of the frame that I'm going to make. And then moving over here, I'm going to use these pieces of Huon pine. I've got 4 pieces, and they're all book matched, which means if I turn them over like this, the pattern is inherent on both sides of the frame. And I'm going to use these boards here to do inlays of timber on all the 4 corners. I usually use timber that comes out of a root system or out of a burl for the inlays on these frames, and the reason for that is I usually get the most ornate patterning in these pieces of timber compared to just a plain plank. The real risk with using burl timber and root system timber is it can have a very cranky grain. It is not very conformed like these planks, and it can go in all sorts of patterns, and it gives an astounding result when it's all cleaned up. So for now, I'm just going to put these inlays to the side. They come in a little bit later. And what I'm going to do now is set the saw up and create some profiles for the side of this Tasmanian Huon pine frame. So what I've just done is I've created a series of bevels up against each piece of timber that I have in front of you, and it's probably hard to see that at the moment. But the reason I put a bevel on the in and outer frame is to create a shadow line on the outer part of the frame. I think by just having a square set frame against the wall can look quite heavy. So creating a relief on the back of this piece of timber gives that nice shadow line and also takes some of the weighting out of the frame. The inner part of the frame, I've also put a bevel on as well, and the reason for that is to help draw the viewer of this frame photograph into the actual picture. I think it just helps to create a more three-dimensional feel for these picture frames. What I've got to do now is a series of creative rebates to take the glass, to take the image. So that concludes the internal and the external parts of this Huon pine frame that I'm making, and it's quite a difficult little process. I've actually made a few little mistakes on the way, just trying to calculate these internal and external rebates, throw in a few nice big chamfers, and it gets a little bit tricky. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to work out the actual width of the picture frame, and before I know the width of the frame and to cut the internal structure up, I need to work out at just what sections of this Tasmanian Huon pine burley section of wood I can use. There's a couple of fault lines through this, or drying cracks through expansion and contraction, so I need to work out what part of this I can actually use and avoid these cracks. I'm going to make the face of the frame 120 millimeters wide, and just to do that I've marked out my inside corner piece like that, and then I'm just going to make a series of measurements 120 millimeters. So what I've tried to do is really maximise this grain that curls its way around up onto this long section of the frame, and this stuff here, this figuring, is known as bird's eye, which is highly prized in Huon pine. I'm going to make this frame a portrait orientation, so I'm going to make this section of the timber longer than this section here to create a sense of height in this frame. So I'll just finish marking a few pieces out here. And there we have it. That's the first section of this inlay to be cut out. What I've just done here is I've cut a series of Tasmanian oak strips up, which make the general structure of these picture frames. I've just waited for all my Tas oak structural inserts to dry, and now I've got to strengthen up the corners where I'm going to do my miters, and I'm going to use Tas oak to do this. It's quite a simple little process, this part. This stage is the tricky stage. I'm up to the gluing of the picture frame, well, the structure of the picture frame. And before I do any gluing, I always do a dry check to make sure everything lines up. What I've done is on each corner, I've cut my 45-degree angles, and I've used a biscuit cutter to put some alignment biscuits in it. And then when it's glued together, I'll come through with my Tas Oak structural pieces of wood and fill these corners in, and that will bring everything up to level so I can start doing my my inlays out of that Huon pine burl. So the frame has successfully been glued together. When I use the burl across the corners like this, I need to have absolute strength through this piece here. If I get any twist in the frame whatsoever and I laminate that burl Huon pine on there, then I'll get all sorts of fracture lines through the frame, and I really don't want that. So from here it's just a matter of loading this up with plenty of glue. Now that I've put my box section of frame together, it's down to the fun part, which is cutting up this Huon pine burl. I've just marked one out, and I will transfer this marked out one onto the other three pieces, which will save measuring 3 more times, and I can get perfect identical pieces, which will give me that nice book match cornering. This stuff is very, very fragile, so I have to be very careful when I cut this stuff. The grain is all over the place, like I've said, and it makes it very cranky and very unstable. So a little bit of caution cutting this stuff. I've just finished completing the 4 corners of the frame with the matching burl inlays, and now I'm going to bridge the gap between the corners with these sensational thin pieces of Huon pine that I've just recently had cut. These are matching boards. Once again, I like to create a mirrored effect. Just finished sanding up these inserts that go between the 2 corners here, and the grain on this is absolutely stunning. It's running very uniform across here, or very parallel, which is what I wanted, and I've got some really nice figuring of bird's eye here. Not too much to take it away from the bird's eye and the pattern in here, but just enough to really complement what I'm trying to do here. I've just waited for all my Tas Oak structural inserts to dry, and now I've got to strengthen up the corners where I'm going to do my miters, and I'm going to use Tas Oak. So I've just finished cutting my Tasmanian oak inserts. What you've noticed is, or what you might notice, is that these 2 pieces of wood are different widths. Okay, this one is obviously heavier in width than this piece here, and what I try to do is create a weighting at the bottom of a picture frame by making the bottom section of these mat boards slightly wider than the top. It's just a visual thing, and I think it sets the picture better inside a frame. It's just a little technique that I use to try and create that length in the picture. I'm up to the stage where I need to cover my internal mat board. I've just finished making this leather bound mat board, which fits in here underneath the rebate I've cut into this frame. The next thing I've got to do is a whole bunch of finishing off, and then I'm going to take this off to the 2-pack guy and get a nice glossy coat put on it.
Too much glue, it's black. I'm trying to remove this.
As you can see, I've just had my frame covered in a nice 2-pack clear, and it's got a sensational finish to this grain, and it's really made it stand out. So for now it's back to the workshop and to get this print and glass put together for the finished product. Welcome to the final part of this Huon pine picture frame. I have had my print laminated into this frame. I don't do my own laminating. I just don't want to invest the time and money into a big set of commercial rollers at this stage. What I do consider though is when I make these frames is what I laminate my image onto, and I've got a couple of choices I usually stick by. The first choice, my preference is on my panoramas, such as this big 2-meter print I took off a waterfall in Iceland a few years ago. I use this aluminium composite, which is about 3 millimeters thick, and it's about 0.5 mil aluminium laminated onto perspex. The reason I choose the aluminium composite for these large panoramas is I've found that over the years, with the fluctuating temperature in a room, the foam core, which is another choice, tends to go a little bit wavy over time, just being a cardboard based material, and I find that's not a very desirable look at all. But what I've found with these medium sized prints is to get away with a lightweight product. The foam core, as I've used here, is the perfect material for this job. What I've done is I've had the foam core placed into the back of this leather mat board, and now it's just a matter of sealing up the back of the frame and then putting the rigging on. For rigging, I use this sailing cord. It's pretty heavy duty. It's rated to well over a ton. I don't get it for its weight bearing capacity, but I really like the feel of cord on the back of a picture. I like to steer away from wire, it cuts into the fingers, and also find that it seems to wrap around my rigging a lot easier than the stainless steel wire. So just for now, I'm just going to start finishing this frame off, rig it up, and give you guys a look at the finished product. Just coming up to the final stage here, and I'm just unrolling this sailing cord and rigging it up. When I rig these big pictures up, I always rig them from the base to the 2/3 mark, up the frame, across the top and back down. I find that rigging big pictures with a large amount of weight needs to be rigged from 4 positions. I've found that just rigging it from here and here on some of the larger frames actually causes it to bend up from the bottom, and it doesn't have enough support. It pulls the frame in of sorts. So by anchoring it from 4 strong positions, I can guarantee that this frame will stay rock solid on the wall. I'm at the finishing off stage now for this Huon pine frame, and I'm really stoked with the result I've got for this particular project. I'm really happy with how the colour of the Huon complements the wheaty coloured foreground from this picture of Armor de Blanc that I chose for this particular project. And for now it's just a matter of marrying up some rigging on the wall to match the rope that I've put on the back for this picture to get it hanging securely. And I'd just like to say thanks for watching my latest landscape and photography blog here in Tasmania, and stay tuned for my next adventure.